Hey, everybody, and welcome to another My JavaScript Story. This week, we're talking to Shawn Clabough. Shawn, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Now, we're probably going to publish this on both My JavaScript Story and My Angular Story, since you do Angular as well. Yeah, I think we've only had you on JavaScript Jabber, if I remember right.
Right. Most of my work now is in Angular, but the topic that we had was more kind of general purpose, so we put it on JavaScript Story.
Yep. So, yeah, I'll put a link to that. That was episode 258 of JavaScript Jabber. And, yeah, we talked about working in a public institution, which is different from sort of your regular corporate job. So it was interesting to kind of dive into that and see what the differences are and where your background kind of feeds into that. So this episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Yeah, and sorry to say, I mean, today's April Fool's as we record this. I didn't really think of any good things to do to you here.
That's okay. I enjoyed the D&D books that you had sitting there in front of the camera when I got on, so that's always fun. I played some D&D in college and then in high school, and then I've kind of gotten into it recently with my brothers and sisters. So, well, some of my brothers and sisters. So, yeah, that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did it in junior high and high school, and then my son's into it a little bit now. That and Pathfinder, I think, is the other version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Pathfinder.
Something like that he tells me about. So he enjoys it too.
Yeah, I played a couple of different role-playing games. So, yeah, I guess that's just another one that's out there. But in high school, I think we played one called Mage, if I remember right. Anyway.
Yeah, not familiar with that one.
But, yeah. It's always fun to talk D&D, but we're here to talk more software and development. So, yeah, let's jump in and talk about your background and where you got into programming. I'm a little curious as we get started. Yeah, how did you get into programming?
For me, it started back. I can remember it actually pretty clearly in fourth grade. Now, for me, fourth grade was 1976, so we're talking a long time back.
Dude.
And I remember a guy came in and he talked about this machine that his dad built.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about, put it together parts, and then you could tell it what to do, and then it could spit things back at you. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So I didn't know the guy that well, but I just had to invite myself over his house to check this thing out.
Nice.
And it's, there was no personal computers at this time. So
Right.
It was just something totally new. So I went over and checked it out. It was like probably 2 feet cube, and it had an 8-inch floppy drive and no graphics, text only. And I must have spent at least a good part of the afternoon over there just dinking around on it. The game it had was this like artificial intelligence game where you ask a question and it just responded with a random question back to you. And you just go back and forth. But I don't know. Right. I just thought it was just the coolest thing ever. So that was my first exposure to computers. And that's just I don't know. It was just something was just innate in me that I just thought they were just so cool and so interesting that I had to find out more. After that, the schools didn't really get computers until I was like in 8th grade. So through 8th grade and high school, everything was TRS-80s and Apple IIs and things like that. And, as soon as they got them, I was signed up. And then also
they had Apple IIs when I was in elementary school. So they had a whole lab of them.
Yeah, we only had one Apple II, and we probably had 8 or 10 TRS-80s.
Uh-huh.
That's all the school could afford at that time until
Right.
high school. Then we had a lab of Apple IIs, and I would stay after school every day. And a lot of times it was playing games, but it was also learning programming. AppleSoft Basic, and then also some of the machine language stuff that you could do with the Apple IIs and get in there and try to make it play music by doing peeks and pokes of the registries and things like that. So I was just totally into it throughout junior high and high school. And that's when I got my first computer. It was a TRS-80 color computer, a whole 4K of RAM.
Yeah, that was a ton back then, wasn't it?
That was a ton, cassette drive. And I had won a black and white television that I did through the Bike-a-thon, which was a fundraising thing back then. And I wrote a hangman game for it, and I could only fit 25 words before I met. Any more than 25 words, and it would just crash.
Oh, that's rough. Yeah, it's interesting just to kind of go into the Wayback Machine and talk about some of this stuff because, I'm taking my kids to NGConf this year to go through the kids track, and they're going to teach them how to program, and they will have no concept whatsoever of this stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they're going to be talking about machines that had 16 or 32 gigs of RAM and a 2 terabyte hard drive is, oh my gosh, that's so ancient.
Yeah. I was talking to one of my family members the other day. We're talking about telephones and flashbacks to when they had, the 20-foot curly cords on it so you can go across the room with your phone.
I know. And then they went cordless and you could walk into the other room. Whoa.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Well, even the people coming into programming now, I mean, if they were lucky, they get to use one of these older machines, but yeah, otherwise, they kind of grew up in the internet age, and you and you're a little older than I am because in 1976, my parents weren't even married, but, you mentioned fourth grade being, then, but, so I didn't even exist. I was born in 79, but yeah, it's, they just, it's a different, perspective on what technology is and where it's come from, and things have changed a lot.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, but there's I still have habits though. I still try to think about how much I'm using for memory and all that kind of stuff, even though I really don't have to be so worried about it anymore. I still find myself trying to make things as compact and as efficient as possible when I'm developing things. So.
Yeah, and it's funny in things like JavaScript or Ruby or I think .NET has a VM and is garbage collected. You still have to play those games. It's just that the VM is doing the work for you, right? And so you have to make sure that you are, playing your reference cards right so it'll get cleaned up. Otherwise, you still have memory growth and some form of memory leaks in your code.
Right.
So you did some basic and other programming in junior high and high school. And then you went to college, and I'm assuming you got a CS degree then?
Yeah, it was CS and a minor in business. So when I went to college, my first classes were C, plain C, not C++, Pascal, Fortran, and COBOL. A lot of the classes were mainframe oriented type stuff, which wasn't really what I was after when I came into college.
Right.
I wanted to learn at that point in time. They'd finally came out with, MS-DOS and IBM PCs and things like that. And I wanted to learn how to program desktops, but that wasn't what the coursework was geared towards. But looking back at it, even though a lot of the technical things about programming I didn't really use once I got out, a lot of the non-programming stuff really became beneficial to me. So a lot of the science classes and especially some of the business classes were really nice to have because now I can actually relate, some of the things that I'm developing to the people that are using it or the people that are asking me to build it for them. because I can see their point of view much better than if I was just pure technical developer.
Right.
So I still lean that college is really beneficial, especially in the long term, for developers. But I could see, some people just can't afford college, or 4 or 5 years that it takes to get through theirs is a long time. So
Yeah,
it's a tough choice.
It's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people, and some people came up through a college degree, and some people didn't. And in a lot of cases, it really just boils down to what you wanted to get out of it, and it also comes down to how you learn and how you operate as a person. And so some people, yeah, college is just not the right answer for them, and for a lot of other people it really is. And it just depends, again, like you said, a lot of the things that you picked up were the non-programming things, and if you're looking for that kind of an education, then yeah, college is terrific. And I did a lot of things in college that didn't make a whole lot of sense if you're looking at it strictly from a can you get hired, or are you going to get where you want to be, one of which is my Italian minor, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it did change the way that I look at certain aspects of the world, and it was well worth it that way. So I agree with you on that basis. But I have some people that they come in and they just want to get as quickly as possible in a programming job. And if that's the only thing, and you're not as interested in some of the other aspects of things that you pick up from college, maybe it's not the right answer. And I think people have to make an individual decision on that. But I definitely agree with you as far as all of that goes. If you want a well-rounded education and a great experience as far as those things go, then college is definitely the way to go. So
yeah, well, if you think about it, there's a potential to be in that career for 40, 45 years. So some of that extra education can come in real handy long term.
Well, and they tend to focus a lot more on how do people put it? The data structures and algorithm stuff that
right.
You just don't pick up kind of learning it on your own.
Right. So I can understand a B tree. I can understand sorting algorithms and all those types of things. Even when I was a student, we had to write a compiler. So we learned tokenization, all that kind of stuff. So it does come in handy that I can understand how the things are working underneath my programming level.
Yeah, I come at it a little bit different. I was a computer engineering major, which means that most of my classes were over in the engineering department, not the CS department, which was part of the math department.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going to school. I did still take plenty of CS classes because it was kind of a blend. But a lot of the things that I picked up as we moved through things were, how stuff operates at what we as programmers would term the bare metal, how the chips are laid out, things like that. And then, as you move up, it's, okay, well, I had to write assembly, right, that ran on this dumb little chip. And the debugger was, okay, I'm going to visually inspect all of the registers.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I expect. That's what I expect. Nope, that's not what I expect. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
All the way up to the high level stuff like how your operating system pages memory. And again, just understanding some of that stuff along with some of the other, I didn't take any of the algorithms classes, but I picked some of it up in some of the basic CS classes. And it's just a different view on things than you get anywhere else.
I think a good middle ground for a lot of people might be looking at a 2-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there is a lot of extra classes that you'll take in a 4-year degree that really don't, help you that much. Where if you go to like associate's degree or something like that, it can be a little more focused and, doesn't take that long. It's not as expensive, but it does get a little more exposure into things that you might not get out of a boot camp or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And so I encourage people, I used to just tell people, no, just do a boot camp. But I really have come back around to what matters to you. And for some people, it's that diploma. They want the diploma. Okay, go to college, right? If you want to have the experience, go to college. If you just want to quick and dirty, get enough get educated enough to get that job, then maybe the boot camp's the right way to go. Or if you're not really set up for 4 years of sitting in the class and, going through that process, and some people aren't, then again, go to boot camp. But
well, yeah. And nice thing about boot camp, though, is that, if you don't really know that this is what you want to do, it does help you get through that decision real quickly.
Yeah, it's a highly intensive way to figure that out.
Yep.
I really hate doing this all the time. Okay.
Yeah. If by the middle of boot camp, you're dreading getting up and going to boot camp, it might not be a good fit for you.
Right. So you said you were in fourth grade in 1976. That makes you about 13, 14 years older than I am. And so you mentioned going to college and learning C and Pascal and Fortran. And today, I don't know what they're teaching there. When I went, it was Java and C++.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to me to just see the progression there. And what I find is, Java wasn't the super hot technology. It was and it wasn't when I was in college, in 1998 is when I started college. So, but yeah, just seeing where some of these schools are going now with the languages they pick, where they're teaching Python or JavaScript or things like that, some of the more progressive schools.
Yeah. Now, when I was worked over at University of Idaho, I actually got hired by the business department to teach a programming class there.
Oh, wow.
And I was teaching VB.NET in those days. So you can get some more modern programming in college now. And I'm sure that they're teaching C# and probably, Ruby and Java here now. So it is more, but they're not going to teach you things like Angular and React and those types of things. It's still going to be a little more low level.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit more of that in sort of the trade school type setups, where they're trying. But again, it's sort of splitting that difference between the boot camps and the 4-year degree, right? So you're going for 2 years, you're getting some of this and some of that, and so when they want to turn people out into a job, and they know that they don't have the 4-year diploma, and so the skills are a little more relevant to them, and so they get a little bit more modern with their curriculum.
Yeah. So I remember after my first year of college here, because we weren't doing a lot of desktop programming during the summer, I actually went over and applied at Microsoft. And that was 1985, and I was like, dang, if I would have got hired in 1985 at Microsoft, I'd probably be pretty set right now. But I didn't hear back from them. And it actually took me a few hours to find them. I grew up probably 25, 35 miles south of their campus.
Right.
But back then they had just moved to their current campus. And there was only a couple buildings there. And there was no Google Maps back then. You had to open up the phone book and look at the address and,
Oh, the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days, the Yellow Pages. And it's like, okay, I went to the first one in the Yellow Pages. Oh, sorry, we've moved. It's okay, go to the next one. Oh, we moved again. And so then I finally found them up at the Redmond campus there and applied, but I didn't hear back. But that's fine. I'm doing pretty good the way I'm at now. So
yeah, makes sense.
It's a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. So after you graduated, did you go straight into software or?
I actually didn't, because I didn't have that desktop programming experience, and I didn't want to go out and find a mainframe job. I ended up doing a few different odd things. I did cable TV commercial production for a while for a local cable company because they didn't have anybody to run all the equipment. So I did that for a while. And then I moved back over to the Tacoma, the west side towards Seattle area.
Right.
And became a assistant buyer for a computer electronics chain. And they had 17 stores throughout the Northwest here. And so that was a cool job. I really liked doing that job as assistant buyer. You'd walk in every morning and there'd be stacks of software and a little hardware for you to check out. People wanted you to buy their stuff for the chain. So they were sending you free stuff all the time. And that was really cool. But they had some financial issues and they kind of shut down. And that's when I decided to go back in learn a bit more programming. So I learned VB.net, and then I got hired at the University of Idaho in their IT help desk area.
Nice.
And this would have been in 96. So just as the internet was coming online. Mm-hmm. And I remember first seeing my first HTTP:// I said, what the hell is that? But that quickly learned what that was. And through the help desk, my first commercial program that I wrote was a help desk tracking system. Because when I got there, all of their communications between the help desk, the networks team, the server team, and all that was done either by sticky note or broadcast emails. And so
wow.
So they had no idea who was working on what state anything of their requests were in and things like that. So it's like, okay, this has got to be made better. And that's kind of my strength, is just looking at things and going, this is not the way it should be. There should be a much better way to do these types of things. To a database, there was no JavaScript that I could really use then. So the only thing I did for this help desk tracking system was HTML and Perl. Mm-hmm. And it was on a Unix machine, and through the controls of the buttons on the HTML, it would pass the whole page off to this Perl script that would slice and dice the HTML based upon embedded comment tags.
Right.
So if I wanted to pull one job out of one queue to move it over another, I would pass in the tag number, and it would just slice that HTML up and then insert it into another HTML document. And it did everything that way. And then it would generate emails based upon, certain triggers. So That was my first commercial programming experience.
That's interesting. And it kind of mirrors mine a little bit. My first IT job, I was working at the university. I was attending BYU down here in Provo. And I worked in the network operations center, which was attached to the data center. So we would go in there and we would work on the servers and things like that. Funny enough, initially when I got that job, the data center, oh man, if you work at BYU now and you work in the data center, you don't know how good you've got it, because when we started, it was literally just this kind of back room on the end of the same building that the math and CS department were in. And so there were these big honking machines. We had a handful of racks in there, and then, these big, I guess they were mainframes. But so we would log into those, and it was awesome. And they built the data center while I was working there. And so then we moved down into an actual real life, nicely built data center with, with all the bells and whistles in it. But after I graduated, I moved into a job at Mozy, mozy.com, and I was running their. After too long, I was running their tech support team, and my first web app, where I built like an actual app that people actually used, was a help desk. It was help desk software, and it tracked all our phone calls and emails and everything else. So, yeah, kind of an interesting parallel there. So you're working there at the University of Washington, and I think you're still there, aren't you?
Well, that was University of Idaho was when I worked at the help desk there. Okay. And now I work at Washington State University.
Okay.
So 8 miles, I moved 8 miles in the job, but I still live over in Idaho.
Gotcha.
So it's only about 20 minutes for me to get to work. So not a lot of traffic.
But anyway, you're working there, and was that when you got into JavaScript, or was that when you moved over to Washington State?
I was there for 17 years. So it was a good place to work. And that's when I did get into JavaScript over there. It was with classic ASP and early ASP.NET. Mm-hmm. And the first things that I did with JavaScript was just, client-side validation. Because in the ASP.NET model, everything is a full postback, when it was early days. Right. To update a page or any section of a page, you'd hit a button and post the whole page back, and then it would come back to you. And validation in the early days was, post back and then reload and show them what was wrong.
Right.
So I wrote JavaScript there to just do validation to let them know that what they're entering in is correct before having to do that full post back type of system. And then after that, they finally, came out with jQuery, and there was also Ajax calls, so that you didn't have to do that full post back. You could just post back certain sections. And so it was just kind of an incremental progression of JavaScript use in the page to make the user experience much better and, like I say, quicker for the person to get that feedback.
Right. That was about when I got into my web development career. And I remember working on things. I was working in Ruby on Rails, but a lot of the JavaScript was written in anger that time. It was, well, I guess I have to do this in JavaScript, and I guess I can use an Ajax, request to make it work. So were you enjoying JavaScript? Were you liking JavaScript? Were you thinking this is a direction I want to go? Or were you coding JavaScript in anger at that point as well?
Well, I don't get angry very much, but I probably did have some angry moments with JavaScript. I don't know if anybody says they didn't. They're probably lying. But it was just because I was so used to, a more structured language, dealing with C# and things like that. All the functions within functions and the callbacks and things like that just got me frustrated to no end. And then ever trying to have to refactor things was just a big headache. And that's why I've lost most of my hair. But it was part of the deal, it was worthwhile to me, to make those improvements and evolve the applications over time, to be better. And then when I really started enjoying JavaScript was probably 2013. And that's right when I switched from University of Idaho over to Washington State University. And I took that opportunity to say, okay, now what can I do to bring all these applications that I'm now inheriting up to snuff and the modern ways of doing things? And that's when I started with Angular JS, 1.3 is I think the first version I started developing in. And that's when I really started to actually enjoy working with JavaScript, because I could do a lot more for my applications on the client to make them a lot richer and a lot more user-friendly.
So I'm going to ask you this then, and this is an area that some of my co-hosts on JavaScript Jabber would argue the point with you on, probably, but do you feel like people need a framework at this point in today's JavaScript land?
Today, I would say there's still enough benefit to using a framework that it's worthwhile. I'm looking at some of the things coming down the pipe with WebAssembly and Blazor and some of those things that is going to be a lot more built into the browser, that we won't need a framework so much. But I think we're still a couple years off from that really being something that you could just write a whole application without a framework and have it be maintainable, expandable, and just well designed.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I'm how do I put it? I'm working to and I need to just reach out, but I've known Ryan Florence for a number of years, and he's a very strong proponent of you need a framework. And there are a couple of guys on the show that very much feel like you don't need a framework, or at least for most applications, you don't need a framework. And so I'm really interested to have that conversation and just see, okay, where do we see the trade-offs, and, what are the costs and benefits of having a framework? But yeah, so I thought I'd get that info in here first, and then maybe you'll come out with the winner. I don't know, and I don't know if there will be a winner as much as just a good conversation about it.
Right. Scale of the applications that I work on, a framework really makes it much better, where I can componentize everything, make it more reusable, scalable, all those types of things. So
Right.
even though, the application I work on right now is still got some old ASP.NET web forms. It's got some MVC,
Uh-huh.
all in one application. But everything that I write new, or everything that I can actually spend time to go back on and redo, is all done and currently in Angular 7+.
Nice. So that's one thing that I want to ask about, is that with Ruby, for a long time there was the saying where people came for the Rails and stayed for the Ruby. In other words, people got into Ruby because they got into Rails, and then after a while they realized that the power was in Ruby and not necessarily, in there's a lot of stuff you get from the Rails way, but the really powerful stuff that you could do in Ruby and not Rails. And I'm curious, has Angular made it so that you enjoy writing JavaScript, or has Angular made it so that you enjoy writing Angular?
Good question. I would say that I enjoy JavaScript, actually TypeScript.
Mm-hmm.
TypeScript has really been the big thing for me, because, being from a C# background and being able to use TypeScript has really made that just 10 times, 100 times better for me.
Right.
By the syntax into it. And of course, a lot of the syntax in TypeScript is now going to be, the latest versions of JavaScript. So as soon as I can get rid of IE11 support, then that opens up a whole bunch more possibilities for the applications that I'm working in. So I'd say, JavaScript, TypeScript is much better. Angular to me was just kind of the enabler. With
Right.
the first version of Angular that I used, having that, two-way binding, just like everybody else, is like, oh my God, that is so cool.
Yeah.
And made that stuff so easy to interact with, data model and DOM. That's I see those frameworks as just enablers. And, they allow you to bring new technologies like component development into, kind of what jQuery did back in the early JavaScript days. It just abstracts things away so you don't have to deal with the headaches, and you can be more productive.
Yep. I definitely hear that. And it's interesting to hear you talking about that, because, that is the direction that JavaScript's going in. In fact, TypeScript, they tend to adopt TC39 ideas and implement them. Babel does the same thing. And it gives you this idea of where JavaScript's going. And I found that I'm also much more productive in TypeScript. I think a lot of it has to do with the tooling. And where I'm coming from, Ruby land, right? And so, it's not strongly typed, but a lot of those tools and a lot of the hints that you can give your application there just make it really, really handy to manage. So I've kind of come around to systems because of TypeScript.
Cool.
So what are you working on right now? Actually, before we get there, so Angular, was it the two-way binding, or was it something else that brought you in and made you kind of go, this is where things are at? Because, we've talked a bit about JavaScript, but what was it about Angular that made you adopt it?
Well, the two-way binding was really cool. So back 2013, I looked at Angular, Ember, and one of the other frameworks that was available back then. And Angular just seemed to be the most intuitive to me. Mm-hmm. The way that it was structuring the code and handling the separation of concern, things like that. So, and because it had the backing of Google, I was like, okay, this is probably going to be sticking around for a while, which is something that I have to really look at it in the things that I choose, because of how long applications live in an educational institution. I've got to make sure that it's going to be around, it's going to be widely adopted, so that if I leave and somebody else to take it over, it's not going to be that hard to find somebody that understands that technology. So all those factors into it really kind of led me to Angular. And I figured, okay, well, I could start slowly on it, because I wasn't building from scratch. I wasn't replacing the whole application. I was just adding on to an existing application. So I said, okay, let's try this out. And it just worked well. And then when Angular 2 came out, I said, I'll move over to that. And I still have some of those Angular, 1.3, 1.5 components in my application that are running, side by side with the current Angular and the .NET web forms. And they're all get along pretty well.
So a lot of people, when they announced a lot of the changes in Angular 2, started looking around to decide if they were going to stick with it or not. Did you do that, or did you just more or less move into Angular 2?
I just pretty much moved into it. I like to keep up with the framework advancements. So, I started with the 1.3, but as soon as they came out with 1.4, it's like, okay, switch everything over, then 1.5. And I switched everything over. And what really made that transition a lot better from AngularJS to Angular was because I had switched all my AngularJS stuff over to be using the component model that they had there. So my separation of my controllers and my views and things like that was pretty easy to convert over to, Angular 2, because all I had to do was basically change a little bit of the syntax in the templates and then strip out the AngularJS specific stuff in the controllers. And after that, it was almost fully ready to go to Angular 2.
Nice. So what are your favorite aspects of Angular now? Because they don't have the two-way data binding anymore.
Right. But it's to build a component with the separation concerns and make all these things reusable with inputs and outputs. And it doesn't have two-way binding, but it's got, I call it double one-way. So there's an in and out. Yep. Yeah. So it wasn't that big of a deal to me. And because they still, they've gone from Angular 2 to Angular 7 in not that long of a time. It continues evolving and getting better. And I think with Angular 8, with the new Ivy renderer, I think those things look really good. So I'm still happy with my decision to go with Angular.
Nice. So what are you working on now? I almost asked that before, but I kind of wanted to push the Angular buttons a minute.
Yeah. So my projects right now happen to deal with our compliance office. So we do research on animals and humans and things like that. And they had a system for evaluating and reviewing their protocols, that the way that they're going to handle the animals and the data and the research was all done by, PDF form before and through a SharePoint website. So I'm converting all that into web-based application forms and workflow, routing and approval, reporting, searching, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's my big projects right now, are compliance. And then we're also finally switching out of our centralized financial system off of a 40-year-old mainframe and into a cloud-based system. So this summer I'll be taking a lot of time and reworking all the integrations between my application and the central systems.
That's cool. Man, I've talked to some companies, and it seems like they're usually larger institutions like what you're talking about. So universities, banks, but they've got these huge mainframes that have all this custom code and stuff in them, and it takes them a lot of time to move off. So it's interesting to see that you're doing that now. Are you just swapping out one system for the other, or are you actually going to have to do some coding one way or the other to, reach feature parity?
For my integration stuff, I'll have to rewrite a lot of this stuff because, it's right now I'm pulling stuff out nightly out of a data warehouse because the mainframe, has no API I can call directly into it from a website.
Right.
So I've got to I go from a data warehouse and I do some loading into our SQL server every night from jobs that I got scheduled over there. So it's going to be moving everything from that kind of a process into where I actually can call into web APIs and get more live real-time data from the central systems.
Right.
And because, from mainframe to now a cloud-based financial system, is going to make a lot of things different.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Right now our timesheets are still on Excel spreadsheets and things like that. And so it's crazy, but we are finally, getting into the 21st century for our central system, which will be real nice.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, just from the standpoint of that you're making some, I guess you being the university, not necessarily you personally, but the university is making some short-term investments for some long-term payoffs. And a lot of times folks don't look at those upgrades until they become so prohibitively expensive, but yet so, for example, again, I talked to somebody at a bank, and, it's a 10-year project now to replace one of their mainframes. And they finally started it because they're worried that if they wait another 10 years, they won't be able to find people that can even maintain the mainframe. And so, you're not waiting until it's costing you so much in the way of manpower and, being able to hire specialists who are now 70 or 80 years old.
Right. Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's an interesting conversation to have. Very cool. One other thing that I like to ask people is, what kind of contributions have you made that you're particularly proud of? And it could be things that you've done at work that you've contributed to the university. It could be open source. It could be talks. It could be, anything, right? I find a lot of people focus on the open source, and that's just one way to do it. But there are so many things that we all give back to the ecosystems we work in.
Right. For me, I've tried to submit some pull requests to some open source projects, and I don't know what it was, but I've just never had that much luck. I've tried to make some features for some of these applications, and I submit it, and they go, "Oh, thanks, it's really cool, but no, we don't want to do it that way. We don't want to do that or this, that." It's like, okay, well, I spent all that time, and I really, now it's just getting rejected because that's not the way you wanted to go. So I kind of gave up on that. And so now what I try to do is to help out other people's when they're having issues, or whenever I have an issue and I'm researching, whenever I find a solution, I make sure to go back to those posts where people were that I found when I'm searching, that they were asking the same question, and reply to with my solution that I found after my research.
Right.
So I do things that way and try to help people out. I've done some missions to definitely typed. So if I find out something that's not got the right type definitions for it, I'll contribute that way.
Right.
And then I also go on a number of Slack groups and try to help out when anybody has a question on Angular or TypeScript or some of the .NET things that I've had experience with. So drawing on my now 20 plus years of, modern development, I try to help out other people to bring them up to speed.
Right. That's cool. And I think that's also often underappreciated, is the help that's given in those kinds of Slack channels and stuff where, people don't see it. It floats right by, but that's where a lot of people are. And that's where they're going to get the help, is from somebody who's there with them. So,
yeah, I had planned on giving a talk at the Boise Code Camp this year, but I ended up having to be out of town during that time. So I'll probably reschedule and do that next year.
Yep. Cool.
Are you familiar with the Boise Code Camp?
They've done one in Salt Lake for quite a number of years, and I think they've done a couple in Utah County as well. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I've seen those. I haven't been to the Boise one. That might be a fun one to hit.
It is pretty fun. It's a one-day thing. There's probably at least 1,000 people there.
Yeah.
And they have a kids course. And so they do a lot of things with Lego Mindstorms, things like that for kids.
Yep.
So, and it's free to attend. So it's cool.
Yeah, I've been working on booking, and I haven't actually built it yet, but I've been working on booking a podcasting booth. And so it might be interesting to, take that up, set it up in one of the public areas. I'd have to get permission from the venue and things, but and from the organizers. But yeah, then just interview some of the speakers at the code camps and, invite some of the other podcasters if there are other folks out there doing what I'm doing up in Boise or Salt Lake. I know there are a bunch of Salt Lake. But yeah, just do that. I hadn't thought about pitching it to them. So that might be fun.
Do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. I've got a call here in about 15 minutes. So I've got to start wrapping this up.
Okay.
Picks for us?
Yeah, I've got a few of them that I figured out. I figured I was going to give a shout out to the Utah JS Slack group. So I'm hanging out there whenever I'm at work. And so anybody wants to reach me, they can find Shawn Clabough at the Utah JS Slack group. Also the Utah.net Slack group. I'm a member of that too as well.
Yep.
And then as we record this, it's April 1st. So tomorrow is the Visual Studio 2019 launch event. So I'll do Visual Studio 2019 is one of my picks. And then also the Boise Code Camp. So if anybody it's in March every year. So it was just over for this year. But if they are looking for things to do next year, check out the Boise Code Camp. And then, are you familiar with the movie Time Bandits?
No.
Remember that movie?
Nope.
I don't. Sean Connery in it. It was John Cleese. It's kind of a Monty Python type movie with a bunch of dwarves that do some time travel and things like that. It's really funny. And I just found out that they're going to redo that movie. So I'm going to
interesting.
throw that out.
They're interesting. A lot of times they don't do them as well as the originals. And sometimes it was like, wow, I didn't think they could do better than the original, but they did. So
yeah, I'm not holding out that the new one's going to be better, but it just triggered my, appreciation of that movie when it came out. And so if anybody has the opportunity to check out the original Time Bandits, check it out.
Nice. And I'm also curious, you picked the Utah JS and Utah.net Slack groups. Do they not have Slack groups for Idaho?
No, I had not found any Idaho Slack groups. There's tons in Seattle that I could join over there, but being in Idaho, I'm just kind of a little more closer and familiar with the Utah area.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, that's definitely where I live. So I know a lot of the people in at least the JS Slack group. I haven't gotten as involved in the .NET group.
Yeah, the .NET group's not as active in Slack as the Utah JS one.
Yeah, Utah JS is a very, very active community. So, and there's actually a Utah JS conference that they hold every September-ish. So
yeah, there's lots of really good people on the Utah JS.
Yep. Cool. Well, I'm going to throw out a couple of picks, and these are all very, very self-serving. But at the same time, it's also something that I'm doing for the communities that I serve.
Your podcast, you can do that.
Yeah, and that's what it's about. It's about podcasting. So I've had a bunch of people come to me and say, hey, Chuck, I want to start a podcast. Can you help me? And the answer to most of them is, I wish I had the time to, and to a select few, a lot of times it's, well, sure, but it's got to be under these specific circumstances. And so I'm just going to talk through some of these real quick. One of them is, or one of the situations is if you put the show on devchat.tv. A lot of times I'm more willing to help shows get started if I can kind of bring them into the family and put out good content. And I realized that, and this was probably within the last week or two, that I really do want to have content out there for everybody in the programming community, which means that, of course, I have to start a whole bunch of shows. So if you're interested in being on shows on any of the following topics, then you probably ought to reach out to me. One of them is open source sustainability and maintainability. I currently have 3 hosts lined up for that show. I'd like to get it to at least 5. I will not be a co-host on that show. As much as I'm interested in the topic, I just don't have time for more shows. In fact, I'm actually backing out of shows at this point and saying, hey, can you guys run this without me? So, I'm no longer on Adventures in Angular. I'm no longer going to be on Elixir Mix or React Roundup, and I'm very seriously talking to the guys on Views on Vue and pulling out of that as well. So I continue doing JavaScript Jabber and Ruby Rogues. And mostly because that's where my passion is. and that's where I feel like I can speak to things specifically. So I don't feel like I add enough as a host because I just don't have the expertise in those other shows, in those other areas. So I may pick those things up later, and then, we'll see where we end up. But yeah. So if you're interested in being on, I was going to say topics. So the topics that we're pulling together: open source, sustainability, maintainability. We have a data science show that's budding. They've actually been recording, so I don't know if we're looking for more panelists there or not. But then I'm also looking at starting shows on AI and machine learning. So if you have some expertise there, we're also looking at augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and what were the other ones? IoT. I'm looking at starting a Python show. I get a lot of requests for that. And I am seriously thinking about doing a .NET show. And so, yeah, so we'll see where we end up there. If you're interested in sponsoring any of those shows, also let me know. And I'm actually starting to pick up contracts to represent those shows for sponsorship for related shows. So I have an iOS show I'm talking to today. I have another .NET show that I'm talking to today or tomorrow. I've got a few other shows out there. And then lastly, if you have a show out there that you listen to but is no longer producing episodes, especially if they've stopped within the last 6 months, let me know, because a lot of times what happens is they quit producing those shows because they don't have the time or money to continue to produce them. And I would like to take those shows on for devchat.tv.
Good idea.
And yes, the onboarding for those is horrendous. But I really want to provide that content for the shows. And I feel like if I pick up a show that's already got traction, then we can probably bring on some of the original hosts, bring on a few new hosts, and just make them continue to be awesome. And that way, that if a lot of times the archives are still there for people to listen to, but they still have to maintain that content, right? They still have to keep paying whoever's hosting the files and providing the bandwidth and stuff, and we can do that. And so it's another way for me to just be out there and make sure that this awesome content doesn't go away. And yeah, some of it goes out of date and some of it doesn't, but at least we can provide that. So yeah, I guess I'm asking publicly for help from people to help maintain all of that stuff. And then the other thing that I'm working on is a system called PodWrench, and that is, I was looking for something that I could blend like podcast and tool. There you go, PodWrench. And it is a system that will manage the recording and production pipeline for the shows and the sponsorship stuff on there. So if you are looking to start a show and you don't want to run it on devchat.tv and you want my help, the best way to do that is to sign up as a beta user on PodWrench. And so I'm getting the last bits of that together, and it should all be up and ready to go by the time this episode goes live. So anyway, yeah, talked a lot about podcasting, but that's kind of where my head is at these days. So
all of those are listed on devchat.tv or will be listed?
They are not currently listed, and I probably won't list them until we get them launched and get artwork and stuff done.
Okay.
I should probably just post a blog post and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and if you're interested in being on any of these shows, then here's where you can let me know.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yep. So I'll get that up, but yeah. That's all my picks. So I'll go ahead and head us toward wrapping up. Thanks for coming, Shawn.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, folks, we will wrap up and we will catch you all next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.